Thank you, Jim. Oh, well, it's hard to follow Jim ever. He has one of the best Substacks around, by the way. I just want to advertise that. What's it called, Jim? Jim Hightower Substack. All right. And you want to hear more of that, he'll do it. It's great to be here in the land of Lloyd Doggett and Greg Cesar and great Democrats. Number of you here today that are going to win and turn Texas blue. And I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana. So I spent a lot of time in Texas. And this is as Jim says, this is not a Republican state. It's a not voting enough state. And that's what we got to change. Before I go through the principles, I want to talk today about the principles of organizing election campaigns, kind of the fundamental principles. You got a lot of different seminars on different aspects of that. Before we get to that, I would like to ask my wife, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, to bring a brief greeting and just say hi. Come on up. There you go. Don't fall. That's one of our slogans.
I'm so proud of all of you that are here today, organizing, fighting back, because you know what I always say to my friends and people who are organizing: when we fight, we win. Do it one more time, louder. When we fight, we win. That's really all I have to say. And this is my husband. I'm here to be with him, and to honor him and all the work that he's done. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, love. All right. And let me thank on both of our behalfs Nancy Thompson, who brought this together and is doing such great work here in Texas. Thank you, Nancy. All right. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is elaborate on my book, my most recent book called Nuts and Bolts: The Formula for Progressive Electoral Success. You can pick up, I think on the front table, there's a thing where you can do a QR code and get one if you need it. Apparently you're going to have a little auction or a drawing for a couple of them. First question in politics is the question that, let me make sure this is working right. Here we go. I'm on slides. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Well, I also got to be able to move these slides along. Here we go. There we go. Here we go. All right. Good. I got it right. When Vince Lombardi, the great football coach for the Green Bay Packers, would convene his troops, his wonderful players, at the beginning of every season, he would start off by saying, "Gentlemen," he'd put a football in his hand and say, "This is a football. We got to start off with the fundamentals and work with the fundamentals." What are the fundamentals of politics, electoral politics? Well, the key fundamental, the blocking and tackling of politics, begins with understanding self-interest. The self-interest of the target voters that we are trying to mobilize or persuade. And there are 6 categories of self-interest I want to just briefly cover. The book describes them in more detail. One, and the ones people think about when they think about self-interest more than anything else, are physical needs. You got your economic needs. There are 2 categories of this. And you got your physical security needs. Economic needs, like, money, enough to eat, having a warm place place over your head. And physical needs like safety, like health care, taking care of your health, like preventing yourself from being invaded. Now, those kind of self-interests all are very important to ordinary people. That's why people who are more downscale are typically more likely to vote Democratic, frankly. But less likely to vote, I might add. But there are more needs. There are a number of other categories of self-interest we also have to be thinking about. One is control over your life, freedom. People want to not be more than a cork in the stream. They want to have agency. Freedom is very important to ordinary people. Number 3, the need for structure and order. And you might think, well, that's contradictory to freedom. But it's not. People want to have a sense that the society is organized, that they have a sense of where things are, because you don't have freedom if you don't have the ability to manipulate your environment, to make things happen. Demagogues often appeal to this need for order in the name of freedom, but they often portray that as a need for authoritarianism. That's not, we need to make sure people have a sense of that things are order. That's why order at the border is important to some people. Number 4, the need for community and human interaction. People want to have status. They want to have other people respect them. They want to have community with people. They want to have communication. They want to feel part of a community. And by the way, one of the most important things the Democratic Party needs to be doing is creating that. When you drive down in Cumberland, Maryland, you drive down the street, and there's a big tavern on the side of the road. It says the Democratic Club. And it is, no kidding around, the Democratic Club. If you're a Democrat, you can come in there and have a drink. And people gather there. We need to create a sense that it's more than a bunch of television commercials, that it's us. 5, intellectual stimulation. People don't want to be bored. We communicate with them, we got to remember that. Hightower sure as hell does. Jesus Christ, you're the most entertaining speaker I know. Intellectual stimulation. And 6, and very, very important, is a sense of meaning in life. People really are desperate for a sense of meaning in life. Meaning comes from the commitments that people make to their other people, to the cause, to your art, to your job. That's what gives people a sense of meaning. Meaning requires that you feel like you're part of something greater than yourself, and that you yourself can play a meaningful role in achieving the broader goal. That's what a movement is about. Creating a sense of massive engagement in something bigger than you that you can play a serious role in achieving. Now, if you want to ever wonder, are those non-physical needs, do they matter to people? Think about solitary confinement. Physical needs are taken care of. They give you food, they give you shelter, but you have no freedom. You have no order or structure to your life. Just these 4 walls constantly. No community or human interaction or affirmation. No intellectual stimulation. And no meaning to your life. That's why solitary confinement is horrible. That's, by the way, why the Vera Institute says that somebody who's exposed to solitary confinement for more than 2 weeks has permanent psychological damage. But we got to remember that we need to appeal to all of those self-interests that people need as we pursue politics. So this is the root. That's the fundamental. That's the football. We got to remember, meaning is the greatest motivator. You want to get people engaged? You want to get people moving? Meaning will motivate people more than anything else. Now, let's move to the principles of political communication. Take these, people got these self-interests now. How do we communicate with them? Message is communicated through narrative, through stories that describe who, when, what, and why. Number one, narrative defines the protagonist and antagonist in every narrative. And you think about books you read, think about stories you see on TV. They always have a protagonist and an antagonist. And let me tell you my theory of why we lost last time. 65% of the people in the exit polls said that they couldn't afford life. That things were tougher than, their parents were going to live better than they did. Well, unfortunately, the campaign went around talking about how great the economy was. People said, wait a second, the economy's my economy. And that's a problem. But part of the problem was we weren't naming, in that campaign, the antagonist in the narrative. The antagonist in the narrative was Trump and his billionaire pals and his billionaire corporations. It wasn't what Trump said, the immigrants, the other, big government, whatever. That's who the antagonist is, and we got to be not afraid to name it. And that is what populist politics is about. So here's a couple of narratives. Gun owners versus the government, or is it victims of gun violence versus the gun industry? Is it reformer versus big government, or is it agent of special interest versus the public interest? The narrative is defined by who is the antagonist and who the protagonist are. A narrative defines the value frame of the debate. We want to cut spending and taxes to reduce the size of government. Oh, well, that's one set of values. They want to take food from the mouths of poor children and give tax breaks to billionaires. That's another one. That implies values, and that is that's communicated through narrative. Now, if somebody encounters a data set that contradicts their value frame, they normally discard the data and not the frame. People have frames of values in their consciousness they've developed. We have to resonate with value frames. We were just talking, Jim and I, before we came up about, I guess it's Tallarico who's run for Senate. What would Jesus say? Well, it's not what Donald Trump says, is it? No, a lot of people have religious value sets. Let's talk about the New Testament. What does that say? It says that progressive values are the values of the New Testament. And we got to talk in those terms when we're talking to people who have that value set. Important that we resonate with their value frames. 3, narrative names the subject of the conflict. They want to eliminate the inheritance tax, very popular. We want an inheritance tax. It makes sense when billionaires their kids don't inherit billions of dollars. But the right wing changed it into the death tax. If you name it as the death tax, that's a problem. Now, we had a similar battle. I was involved heavily in the battle to defeat the privatization of Social Security under George Bush. Some of you are old enough to remember that. And they're going to try it again. They wanted to make it a battle about personal accounts. We wanted to make it a battle about privatizing Social Security. We won the naming game, and that's the reason we won the game. Names really matter. Sometimes naming sets the value frame. It tells us the motivation of the actors. They want to cut Medicare in order to give tax breaks to billionaires. If you don't add the part about tax breaks to billionaires, people say, why would they want to cut Medicare? Why would they want to cut Medicaid? Oh, because they want to give tax breaks to their billionaire friends. That makes it resonate. That makes it make sense. The motivation is very important in narrative. Now, the best political communication is always symbolic. It's extraordinarily important that we always be talking about things that are symbolically powerful, whether it's a story or a name or a example. Most importantly, a personal story. Personal stories about healthcare, for instance, are so powerful relative to abstraction. Any abstraction is not so powerful, which gets me to the question of breaking through. There are jillions of messages out there, right, in the world. We need to break through and get people to remember what we're trying to communicate. And if you remember, one thing I say today, this is it. The key to memorability is brought to us courtesy of Maya Angelou, the poet. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. People remember what you make them feel. That's why concrete stories are so powerful relative to abstract charts and graphs or something like that. We have to make people feel. And this is particularly important because politics is more like a love affair with the voters than an exercise in rational decision making. Now, when you're in a love affair, more than anything else, voters look for the qualities in a candidate that make them feel good about themselves. Right? The person you're relating to in your love affair, it doesn't go over too well if you're trying constantly to make people, her or him, think you're great. It's that making them feel good about themselves in your presence. That's what's good. By the way, Hightower's best at that. My wife is the best at that. She makes people feel that they cared about and they're meaningful and they're important. She's great at hugging. Hugging, good stuff. We've got to remember that the fight's the thing. Not just for memorability, but for defining the narrative. Defining who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist. If you want a crowd in a schoolyard, you have a fight, right? Any of you who are teachers know that very well. Same's true in politics. You got to have a fight. And that's what defines all of the elements of narrative that we're trying to communicate. Yeah, the other way to break through is by repeating. Repeated multiple contacts add up to more than the sum of their parts. Ask McDonald's or anybody who advertises constantly. Same is true here. Unfortunately, and by the way, that's why we have to settle on narratives that we repeat over and over and over. Stories that we tell over and over and over. I mean, I can't tell you a number of times I heard Jim talk about how George Bush was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, because he said that a lot back then. And that made him very popular with the young George Bush, apparently. Anyway. Now, let me say a few words about weapons of influence. There was a wonderful guy named Robert Cialdini, a number of years ago, wrote a book, a marketing book about weapons of influence, and the same things go for politics. There are 7 triggering mechanisms we need to think about. One is the contrast principle. When you walk into a store to buy a suit, does the salesman show you the cheapest suit first? No. Shows you the most expensive suit first, so that when he gets to the cheaper suit, you say, what a bargain. Commitment and consistency. People want to feel that they are consistent. If you get them to commit themselves to something, they're likely to continue to believe that that direction works. That they want to continue to be committed to it. So that, for instance, and I think I'll get to this again, but let me just say this. Well, here, I'll say it right now. People act themselves into beliefs and commitments to a cause more easily than they can be convinced by argument. You get people to a No King's Day rally, they're much more likely to want to do the next thing because they've been out there cheering. They've been out there rooting. And that's a hugely important principle to electoral politics. Get them to do something. Rooting for your team is a form of acting and making an emotional commitment. I mean, why do people support sports teams? I mean, they have no vested interest in them, really, unless they're gamblers, right? But once they start rooting for the Texas Longhorns, then it's their team. They've made an emotional commitment to it. And the same is true in politics. This principle also applies to the principle of one step at a time. Let me tell you a quick story. My first mentor in politics was a guy named Peter Martinez, who was a wonderful organizer. And we'd work late on the north side of Chicago in our office. And I lived on the south side of Chicago, and he lived even further south, 95th Street. And he pulled this on me all the time. He'd say, Bob, would you mind dropping me downtown? I'll catch the train down to my house. Okay. We go downtown. He said, you know, if you just take the, what's called the Dan Ryan Expressway and then cut over to your house at 55th Street, I can catch the train there. And we get there, and he'd say, you know, it's only 10 minutes to my house. Our job in politics is to take them to 95th Street. We got to, one step at a time, get somebody to put a yard sign in their yard. They don't know that the next thing they're going to do is come to a meeting or have a coffee or start canvassing or get on the phone and ultimately devote their life, fortune, and sacred honor to the campaign. But if you ask them to devote their life, fortune, and sacred honor to the campaign first, they're saying no. But they'll take that yard sign. One step at a time. Number 3, reciprocity, reciprocation. People are more prone to say yes to you if they feel like they owe you a little something. That's why businesses give stuff out and, you know, will hand things out to you and whatever. Put things in the favor bank with people. Politicians who are too transactional don't go too where. They often go to prison. You want to make people feel like this organization is doing something for them, and then when you ask them, they're much more likely to do it for you. Social proof. So important. You know, a lot of consultants are not big yard sign fans. I am. Tell you why. It's a cheap way to get name recognition. But you know what else? If you're the voter and you see that all of your neighbors have a yard sign for a candidate, you say, well, he must be okay. Social proof matters to people hugely. Bandwagon is a big deal in politics. That's why the last thing we want is people whining and hand-wringing about how, oh, they're so smart and, oh, they're so hard to beat. Baloney. We're going to beat them. And lots of people agree with it. I love that Rachel Maddow, you get Rachel Maddow on Top of Each show, she puts on all the protests that are going on around the country. So lots of people like you are doing it. That's hugely important because that'll make more people more prone to do it. All these protests, one of the reasons they are so good is because they give a sense of social proof. And we have to constantly be winners. When we fight, we win. And that is because, by the way, human beings are pack animals. They travel in packs. Just like horses and pigs and everybody. In fact, you know, you just remember this little factoid. There are only 2 animals that are domesticated that don't travel in packs. I bet you know who they are. One of them is the cat, of course, which domesticated us. People say dogs have masters and cats have staff. And the other, and you'll never guess, is the ferret. The ferret has been domesticated and it's not a pack animal. But everything else, all of the herding animals, human beings are herding animals. They travel in packs. Authority. People respond to authority. And that can be communicated by how you dress. That can be communicated by your story. That can be communicated by that you never lie to people. Titles, dress, trappings, credibility. You never tell a lie. That's a big deal. Always deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Number 6, liking. People are more prone to do what people say they ask them to do if they like you. So try and make people like you. Be nice to people. Treat them with respect, and they'll like you. Number 7 is loss aversion, scarcity. Limited time offer. It is always easier to mobilize people to get them to keep something from being taken away from them than to achieve a goal that has not yet been achieved. So while I am, by the way, completely in the camp of we got to be talking about what we want, expanding Social Security, Medicare for all and so on. All that's good, very important. We got to be doing that because people don't want to return to the status quo, but people will respond to, they want to take away your health care to give tax breaks to billionaires. You want to take something away from somebody, it pisses them off. And they'll be ready to do something. I mean, they convinced a lot of Americans that the ACA, Obamacare, was taking away their health care back in 2009? And they won the 2010 elections on that. They picked up 61 seats that year. Which, by the way, gets me to a point that I want everybody to remember. In 81% of the midterms since 1982, the president's power lost seats in the Congress. And we're going to do it again this time. All right, now we're going to touch the question of a goal of a campaign. Goal of a campaign is what? Election campaign. To change the behavior of decision makers. Let's remember that. Campaigns are not just about making people do what they would have done anyway, because if the campaign doesn't change the decision makers' minds, we may as well all go to the beach, right? So the first question of a campaign is, election campaign is, who will change, whose behavior can we change? Who are the targets of a political campaign? Well, first off, it has to be people who live in the district we're trying to impact. And of course, then it has to be who? People who are registered voters, or we can make registered voters. But whom among these are people whose behavior can be changed? There are only two groups. Who are they? There are people who are persuadables, and there's another major group. People who are mobilizables. Now, let me do over the definition here. Persuadable voters regularly vote and are undecided. Those are who persuadable voters are. People who are going to go to the polls most likely, but they are switch hitters. Sometimes they vote for Democrats, sometimes for Republicans, sometimes the same election split their tickets. We need to know who they are and address them with persuasion messaging. The other group, mobilizable voters. And it's not just people who always turn out and always vote for us. No. Those are the people we want to recruit as volunteers. Mobilizable voters are people who are would vote for our candidate but are unlikely to vote unless they are mobilized. Very important. These two groups are mutually exclusive by definition. I mean, persuadable voters are people who are undecided but always vote. Mobilizable voters would vote for our candidate but are unlikely to vote unless they're mobilized. So, first problem is to find those people. How do we find persuadable, mobilizable voters? Give me a couple of quick suggestions. How would you find persuadable and mobilizable voters? Those two definitional questions. Voter history, very good. Voter file. What else? I'm sorry? You ask them, that's right. You ask them. How else? Of course, depends on the election. General election, we have a lot more information than in the primary. Primary, we pretty much, that's the main way. We ask them. Well, here they are. Geography, where they live. We have secret ballots in the United States. We don't know how the individual voter voted, but we do know how the area voted, don't we? We know how a precinct votes. So if somebody lives in a precinct that is 70% Democratic in election day, what can we say about the odds that a person who is living there will vote Democratic? 70% odds they're going to vote for us if we turn them out. This has a lot to do with the targeting of precincts for canvassing. Demography, what kind of person they are. African American voters are the smartest voters in America. They vote like 90% Democratic. So, right? So if somebody's an African American voter, the odds are good that if we turn them out, if they don't vote, they're going to vote for Democrats. Same can be said, by the way, notwithstanding this alleged movement of Hispanic voters to Republicans, most Latino voters still vote Democratic. And on the other hand, need to be addressed in very concrete ways. I don't want to denigrate the importance of addressing persuadable Latino voters. Very important. Voter history, past voting history. If the definition of a persuadable voter is somebody who's likely to vote, and the definition of a mobilizable voter is somebody who is unlikely to vote, we know from the voter history whether they voted or not. If somebody votes 20% of the time, they are a mobilizable voter, right? And they're not going to vote unless we get them to vote. And canvassing by phone or door to door, and we ask them about their future behavior. Those are the major ways we can find, and then, of course, we have analytics. That basically combines all these other factors into statistical probabilities about specific voters. And there's a lot of work done in that front as well. So, the goal of the message with persuadables is what? It is to convince the undecided voter to support our candidate, right? It is not to convince them about some issue. It's not to convince them about, it's to vote for us. And the goal of the message, let me get to this first. There are 10 qualities that matter to most persuadable voters. And I will run through them. Is the candidate on my side? In my judgment, super top of the line important. Does the candidate stick with me? Does my sense of my interest, my self-interest, is this person going to stand with me? Does he or she have strongly held beliefs and values? A lot of people used to say, well, I don't agree with Ronald Reagan, but he certainly believes what he says. Now, of course, I don't think that was probably true, but he communicated that. People don't want folks who will put their finger in the air. When somebody says they're a typical politician, it means, they just go with the polls say. People like candidates who stick up for what they believe. And I will tell you a quick story about that stick with me. I just told you I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, right? And it snowed one Mardi Gras in Shreveport. It never snows in Shreveport. So it's closed my high school. And me and my buddy, we hopped on a train, went down to New Orleans from Mardi Gras to stay with his brother, who was at Tulane Medical School, and we walked down to French Quarter, down Bourbon Street. And I remember walking down Bourbon Street, I was 16, and this big hawker in front of this strip joint says, "Come on in, Sonny, they're going to say you did anyway." And that's true in politics. The other side's going to accuse you for being for progressive values. By God, stand up for them and stick with it. And people will love that. Is the candidate a strong, effective leader? All things being equal, people would rather have somebody on their side who's a strong, effective leader than somebody who's a weak, ineffective leader. In general, by the way, however, my experience is that people would rather have a candidate that's on their side who's a weak leader than people who is a strong leader who's against them. So no matter how much Trump tries to convince people he's so strong, if we can convince them that he's on the other side, we're going to win their vote. Self-confidence. Not surprisingly, people don't follow hand-wringers and people who are unsure of what direction they want to take us. They want to follow people who have strong, clear understandings of where they want to lead things. We have to communicate that. And that means we have to be communicating hope and vision. Candidate respects me. You want a pure way to eliminate somebody's ability to vote for you? Convince them that you don't respect them. Respect comes in all sorts of forms, including just listening to people, paying attention. But communicating a sense of respect. I think Hillary Clinton lost her campaign when she called a bunch of people, what was it she called them? Deplorables, thank you. You know, these are voters she wanted to get. And by the way, showing up is half of politics. You know, just being somewhere communicates respect for somebody. Staying at events instead of just going there and making an appearance and dropping out, you know, shows respect for people. Anyway, respectfulness is huge. Likability. As I said, you know, people are more likely to support you if they like you. People will listen to you if they like you. So being friendly and likable is a good quality for a candidate. And there are a lot of campaign ads that are, you know, where that's a huge component. Just making a person likable. Resides in the moment. People want candidates who are not constantly looking over their shoulder and figuring out who's more important in the room, and not constantly moving to the next. They want people who reside where you are, with you. Integrity, that's an important characteristic. Donald Trump has demonstrated to us once again that integrity is not the highest thing on the list, sometimes. Although the Epstein scandal may cause him big problems with his base, with people who just get dispirited by it. Well, that's a fine thing. Integrity. Vision. People want candidates with vision. Yogi Berra used to say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And people want to know that their leaders have a vision for the future, for where they want to take us. And it ain't backwards. Finally, does the candidate inspire me? By inspiration, I mean convince you you're part of something bigger than yourself and that you can be a significant role in achieving the broader goal. Inspiration communicates meaning. It also communicates a feeling. Great candidates are inspirational. Now, let's move to the goal of mobilizable voters. It's different. We are not trying to persuade mobilizable voters to support our candidate. By definition, they would. We are trying to motivate those voters that it's to get out to vote. They already support our candidate. We want to convince them it's worth their time to go to the polls or cast a mail ballot or whatever. So the subject of a GOTV message is not the candidate, it is the voter. There are 13 basic messages that motivate people to vote. Inspiration, giving people a sense of empowerment. There's no secret that more downscale voters are less likely to vote than upscale voters, even though the decisions of our polity are more important probably for downscale voters, right? And that's because people don't, if they don't feel like they're empowered in general, why the hell should they vote? We got to get them a sense of, I am somebody, as Jesse Jackson used to say. Hope and enthusiasm. We got to convince people to be hopeful that their vote will make a difference. And one of my partners says, if you can't get them to hope, you can't get them to vote. So, hopefulness. Bandwagon, everybody's doing it. Social proof. Everybody's voting, you got to vote. Other people will know. One of the things a lot of people don't know is that there's a public record of whether they vote. So a lot of our GOTV communications needs to say, you know, I see here from the voter file that you don't vote. What? Oh, shit. Your vote matters. It's closer than you think. That's why you get campaigns that say, he's coming on or I'm coming on. People don't want to throw their vote away, their time away. Making a commitment. Voting, making voting appear personal and easy. A lot of our GOTV communications needs to make it clear to people how they can vote and how easy it is. Fear resolved in anger. Let me just say a quick word about that. Fear immobilizes people. We don't want people to be afraid. We want to be angry. We want to be motivated. Us versus them. Those sons of bitches tried to screw our community. Let's get them. Punishment for something they did before. Don't let them steal your vote. You know? Rather than saying, oh, these guys are voter suppressing us. They're trying to steal our vote, and we goddamn won't let them. Demand for respect. A lot of our communications we do with GOTV to immigrant voters, or formerly immigrant voters, and recent immigrants, is we got to teach them to respect us and stop this stuff, and we'll show them at the polls. And massive repetition of the most important GOTV message there is, I won't get off your porch until you vote. The best get out the vote operations I know, election day, contact the voter, these mobilizable voters 5 times. 3 times door to door and twice on the phone. You'll never lose a vote because somebody's mad at you for contacting them too often. A good GOTV operation is one where somebody is knock on the door and the guy says, your office is on the phone with me right now. I said, well, we won't bother you anymore if you get your ass out here to vote with me right now. And let me just tell you how important GOTV is. We were doing this wonderful campaign for a candidate who's running in a South Florida congressional district in the year, 2000, I guess. And we had a great operation. We had like 15 organizers. We had a couple thousand volunteers out there election day, knocking on doors and everything. But then we came up short. 550 votes short. Our candidate lost. Now, if we'd have gotten one more vote a precinct, they had about 550 precincts. Not only would our candidate have won, but there would have been no Iraq war. Our president would have led the charge on climate change way earlier, because that's the same 550 votes that cost Al Gore the election for president. Every vote matters. When the time comes and you say, we got enough votes, we did good, that's the time to go get that last goddamn vote. Great campaigns are like treasure hunts. Remember this. Our goal is to go into the election with a list of names, names I'm talking about, not demographics, not groups, names of people who, if they vote for us, we will win. So we want to figure out what our win number is, and we want to collect those names, door to door, through these other targeting mechanisms, and then we want to get them out. It's a simple process, but people a lot of times think it's about kind of broad communication about, no, it's about finding 30,000 votes or whatever, and then getting them out to the polls, one at a time, if that's what's necessary. Now, there are other topics dealing with this and nuts and bolts here. You can, by the way, you can order one if you want. There's a thing on the desk over there. Much more in the principles of political communication, uses of negative messaging, issue campaigns, organizing field operations, which is what gets these, let's find those folks, organizing fundraising operations, call time, right? Yeah. New technologies, and the qualities of great organizers. But I want to leave you with this. Change is hard. Powerful forces always have vested interest in the status quo. But I want you to remember, not over till it's over. And when you feel like quitting, you always need to think about why you started in the first place. And always remember, and this is so important this year, next year, hopelessness is the enabler of injustice, and hopelessness leads to the complacency that enables authoritarianism. Authoritarians require complacency. John Meacham's book, great book, The Soul of America, The Battle for Our Better Angels, he says American history has always involved battles between hope and fear. And each time, throughout our history, with a combination of strong leadership and popular organization and hope, our better angels have won. John Lewis, I remember John Lewis. When I was a young man, I remember seeing him on TV, almost beaten to death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Edmund Pettus Bridge was named after Edmund Pettus, who was a grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And you would have thought these folks would be hopeless. They were campaigning for a right to vote at all. 50 years later, Jan and I had the privilege of walking behind John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, and the first black president of the United States across that bridge. Arc of the moral universe is long, and it does indeed bend toward justice. But we must provide the hands that make it so, my friends. Meacham says, for all our darker impulses, for all the shortcomings, and for all the dreams denied and deferred, the experiment begun so long ago, carried out so imperfectly, is worth the fight. There is, in fact, no struggle more important, none nobler than the one we wage in service of those better angels, who, however besieged, are always ready for battle. If we remember the principles of great electoral and issue organizing, and if we organize the state of Texas, you can turn it blue. We can defeat authoritarianism, and together we can create the most progressive period in modern American history. Thank you all very much.